in Strava's case, we got the same thing. You guys are a hobby. You're a niche. You're just trying to serve cyclists. And we kept trying to explain to people, look, that is a go-to-market strategy. We're going to go an inch wide, mile deep with this one group. But if we do that right, that will give us the leverage to expand more effectively. It'll give us the confidence and the credibility to expand. And so our vision is to support a global community of athletes across lots of activities and countries and types of individuals. But we have to start somewhere. So I would just remind entrepreneurs, it's okay if you're niche. It's much better because you can develop traction there.
Mark, thanks for coming on.
Oh, Barry, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to get into the most important question of all. I think the most important thing that I wanted to figure out is why Strava and where did the name Strava come from?
Okay, well, the name part's pretty easy. The name part is Swedish. It means to strive for. My co-founder has deep Swedish roots. Family's from Sweden. He's Swedish. And actually, he and I had founded another company decades ago, frankly, in the last century, that also had a Swedish name. We pronounced it Kana, although that's not actually the correct pronunciation, but that had been very good to us. So when we came back to sort of thinking about a name for this company, we liked the Swedish roots, we liked the luck, and frankly, we liked the short domain name. So that was the reason behind the name. The reason behind the company is a little longer, but it's equally fun.
Yeah, the name was, I sort of knew the name, and I think that was cool using to strive. And, with sort of the roots of Strava, it's an interesting story, to say the least. And I know that there is not a lot of people, I know a lot of friends of mine who use Strava actively, but when I tell them a little bit about the origins of Strava from what I've read and from what I've heard from you, it is interesting and to see how it's grown over such on a global level, but also, on the types of activities that you're able to do and all those things. So I think for maybe all the listeners out there who have used Strava, who are using Strava, I am an avid cyclist. I have a lot of cyclist friends and runners. Why don't we sort of just go back to a bit of the early days and figure out what happened sort of along your journey and something that sort of how you met your co-founder as well, to understand a little bit about the roots of the Strava story, and we can start there.
Yeah, no, happy to. So you're right. In order to tell the Strava story, you have to go back. And again, I'm going to make myself sound like a dinosaur, but many decades. You have to go back to the 1980s, which is where and when I met my co-founder, Michael Horvath, who's my best friend and has been so for 30 plus years. We met while rowing on the crew team at Harvard in the late 80s, and had this sort of transformational experience. First off, to go to Harvard, we were really lucky to be on the crew team, one of the few, really great teams that come out of a place like Harvard, but just all the history and the camaraderie and the esprit de corps and, working out of that boathouse, it was fantastic. In fact, I always argue that I should have a degree that says crew because frankly, I spent way more time in the boathouse than I did, any classroom. The only problem was we graduated and that whole experience disappeared for both of us. Michael went off, he got his PhD in economics and started teaching at Stanford. And I took a job working for an investment firm out in California, out in the Palo Alto area, the Bay Area. And, within just a few short years, I had this itch to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to start something. And I also had this itch for the good old days of hanging out with my teammates and training partners. And, a very long story short, in 1995, we tried to launch what was Strava, although it was called Kana Sports at the time. It had a different name. We tried to launch this virtual locker room on this new thing called the internet circa 1995. And, the short version of it was that idea was a little ahead of its time. The good news was we found a different opportunity in the midst of starting that first one. And so we did build a great company called Kana Communications and had a lot of fun doing it. And I think that's what taught us how much fun, frankly, and challenge comes from being an entrepreneur and starting companies. So then you have to fast forward to 2006, 2007, 2008. Michael and I are getting the itch to start something again. We start brainstorming ideas, and we looked at a lot of different ideas, but ultimately we did come back to the virtual locker room, to this idea of bringing our friends together to help us train and stay active. And, the thesis was really simple. The thesis was, number one, when I'm active, I'm a better person. I'm a better coworker. I'm a better parent. I'm a better student. I'm a better partner. So, hey, let's stay active. The other thing we learned was staying active is really hard. And so having teammates, having friends who can kind of share that journey with you is, we often joke at Strava, people keep people active. So how do we keep people connected in a way they can do that? And that was the genesis for Strava circa 2008. And thankfully the times had changed, right? The advent of GPS devices and smartphones and frankly, social networks, these were now all in existence and kind of changed consumer behavior in a way that we could much easier build that virtual locker room, right? That place on the internet where people could share their activities.
With Strava, sort of going back, because you mentioned you met your co-founder at Harvard, and you also were able to identify something that you wanted to do. It wasn't necessarily a solution to a problem yet, but it was figuring out, okay, well, how do you stay active? And I think there's a lot of folks out there who are saying, well, I need to come up with the next idea or the next problem to solve. But it doesn't necessarily have to work out that sort of way. I think you just found that there was an area that you enjoyed, which was activity, exercise, fitness, and there was that niche. And I'm sure back then you didn't even know how big this could be. This was just something between you and your buddy that you wanted to do. How crazy does it, like in hindsight, with 2020 hindsight, how does that make you feel with so many people using Strava now?
Yeah, no, you're right, Barry. It's look, I am honored. Often my best days are when I run into somebody who is using Strava and gives me a great story around, what it's done for them, or just the enjoyment that they get out of it using it, each day or each week. And it has. It's far exceeded my expectations in terms of, when we started out, there's a group of 5 or 6 of us, and we felt like, well, let's build a product that'll keep us active. And, Michael and I used to joke, if we're the only 2 customers, but it keeps us fit, then that's probably a pretty good solution. But, going back, given that, entrepreneurs are listening to you and I, you're right. I was really fortunate when I was working for the investment firm. I learned something really valuable because at the time, so I was a kid out of college working for this firm. I did one thing for them. And what it was I called companies all day long. I dialed for deals. And the beauty of doing that is that you get to talk to entrepreneurs all day long. And what I learned, 2 really great lessons. Number one, from the investors, solve problems. Exactly what you're saying. Can you identify opportunities or problems in the marketplace? Because if you do, even if you're a startup, people will listen to you if you're truly solving something. The other thing, though, that I learned from the entrepreneurs was, you might as well pursue something you're genuinely interested in, because you're going to be doing this 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You're not going to make a lot of money. It might as well be something that you enjoy. So even back in the 1990s, I was desperate to try to find some problem related to sports or fitness or outdoor activity. And, it led to another journey with Kana. But with Strava, I think you're right. We found that sweet spot. We found that thing that we were genuinely passionate about, but was a need in the marketplace. Maybe not a hard and fast problem with an ROI behind it, but the more that we grew it, the more people joined, the more you realized, oh yeah, no, this benefits my life. It's a good thing. And that's been exciting to see as we've gone.
And you speak to an interesting point. I was speaking to a founder, at one of the previous podcasts that I did, and he was telling me about his startup, and different space, but it was a startup nonetheless. And he was telling me about the long hours, the amount of effort that it takes to build a company, because no one in their right mind would put them through that much suffering and pain for maybe a little bit of reward at the beginning and not knowing where this could take them. So there's definitely there is definitely passion in there, and also a lot of persistence, but it is tough. And I think a lot of people just don't understand, or when you are someone who wants to go through and build a company, you see it gets romanticized a little bit, I would say, the startup world, where they realize, well, it's cool being a founder. I can put on my LinkedIn profile and have a title of CEO, but that's only a part of it. And a lot of it is like, well, getting to the ground. You mentioned calling people up, going out, seeing if you can get some sort of product market fit. I'd like to sort of understand a little bit about the brainstorming process, because when you and Michael figured out that there was something there with regards to, oh, maybe this is a thing. It seems to be working for the both of us. I like to use it. You like to use it. What was that brainstorming process like? Were you guys like, you went onto a whiteboard and you just hashed it out? Yeah, like a brainstorming session, or were you just at a cafe talking about it? And how did the brainstorming process transition into execution? Because I think there's a lot of people who have this great idea and it's great on paper, but they just don't have the motivation or the willingness to take action to actually implement that. So how did you move between those stages, if that makes sense?
Barry, one thing, and you triggered in my brain when you talk about sort of how they romanticize entrepreneurship. I often I'm fortunate that I'm both an endurance athlete and an entrepreneur, because I think there's a lot of similarities between the two. And you start to appreciate what we call type 2 fun, right? In the moment, it's just not very fun. Like it's a grind, but then you finish, you're like, you forget all the bad stuff and you enjoy it. And I think that's a lot of what entrepreneurship is. It's like, can you grind? Can you grit? Can you persevere through a lot of pain and suffering? And then lo and behold, you forget one day and you have that one win, whether it's, a small win, just a customer says yes, or an investor says yes, and you're on cloud nine. So
but maybe quickly going back to that, let's quickly identify for those who don't know what type 1 and type 2 fun is. Maybe you want to just give a definition of the difference, because I understand the differences, but maybe for those who are not too aware, what's the difference between type 1 and type 2 fun?
I think type one fun is the one everyone's familiar with. We go out on a Saturday night, we go to the movie theater, and we're having fun. We're enjoying the movie, we're watching it, or we're having a nice meal. That's type 1. That's the one we're all familiar with. Type 2 fun is you're running a marathon. You're at mile 21. You are in pain. You are suffering. You don't think you can even finish, but somehow you just kind of grind it through, even if you crawl across that finish line. And about 3 hours later, actually probably a day later, you're like, that was fun. Like that was great. And in the moment, no, it was horrible. But when you finish it, in a weird way, you're ready to go sign up for your next one. And I think that in some ways that's entrepreneurship, right? It's often, it can be lonely. There's just a lot of sort of dark moments as you're trying to sort of, overcome everything from your own insecurities to a lot of self-doubt, to people saying no to you a lot. You got to have a thick skin. And that's the type 2 fun I'm describing. So if you can get used to that, I do think there's tremendous benefits to entrepreneurship. You said it earlier. I mean, just, the fact that I control what time I wake up in the morning and what I'm going to do with my day is something that I've always appreciated. So that's the why behind doing it. Back to your brainstorming, yeah, we can walk through the process that Michael and I went through, and I think for everybody it's a little bit different, but there were some good things there.
Yeah, I think the type 1 and type 2 fun is just really important for people to understand, is that there is definitely suffering in there, and then you get this sort of like this, you're riding this wave of ups and downs, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of suffering in between, but then the reward really shows for itself. And it is a big reward when everything comes together. And I think a lot of founders can resonate with that.
That's right. And you often find reward in the strangest places. It's not like everybody has to, take a company public or somehow sell it to make it, hit their exit strategy or thing. I think, again, people get lost in the outcomes versus appreciating what the journey is like. The rewards are, when I've been on good teams, there's just nothing like it. And whether that's a rowing team or a running team, or in the case of, the Strava team, one of the best parts are just the people that I get to work with. And when we hit on something or you have a big customer win, or you hit a milestone of some kind, that's when it's worth it. So, or, in the case of Strava, I could tell you story after story of people where we've effectively changed their lives, whether it's, I mean, fascinating stories between weight loss or somebody who sort of identifies that they have a heart problem because they're tracking their activities on Strava and they're monitoring their health and they realize that they need to see a doctor. I mean, it's just these little things that were totally unexpected that make it worth it. So
yeah, the impact is really real. It's difficult to identify the impact because it's so intangible sometimes because you're so abstracted away because you have a platform, but the people are using it, but you don't know how they're using it, how it's impacting their lives, their interactions with people. And I think you hit the nail on the head about the idea of sort of I'm a big proponent of taking breaks in between work, whether it be taking the dog out or going for a walk, right? Having some sort of physical activity in between to really context switch and say, look, I know my life's busy, but if I don't do this now, my day is going to suck. So having the opportunity to exercise or go for a small bike ride or like that really does help with your self-esteem. And I think we can get into the sort of the mindset of that going up and later in the conversation. And just circling back to sort of Strava, when you had that idea of like, well, now we got to take this to the next level, what did that look like? Not just from the brainstorming perspective, but like, okay, how do I now speak to people, and then how do I get traction on what I think could be big? What was that process like?
Yeah. So a little bit of background to set that stage and the context for it. So the first thing everybody has to remember is Michael was a PhD in economics, and I graduated with a degree in art history. So we can't write code. We are not software developers. So if we're going to come up with an idea like Strava, the very first thing we got to do is we got to figure out if we can rope anybody in who actually knows how to put some of this stuff, onto a computer or onto a phone. And so I got to give credit where it's due. There's an amazing gentleman he's still with us at Strava today. His name's Davey Kitchell. And Davey was somebody that Michael had met out in New Hampshire, where Michael was at the time that we started Strava. And Davey was an endurance athlete like Michael and I, was really passionate about thinking about ways in which we could use data to kind of create stories and inspire. And he and Michael was working on one idea because we weren't sure which idea we were going to pursue. So Michael and his nephew, Pello, were working on one idea. And this was around sort of water conservation and so forth. And then Davey and I were working on the Strava idea. And when I say working on, you're right. A lot of it was we had this theory that there was a lot of data being captured by some of these very basic devices, either worn on your wrist or on your handlebars of a bike, a Garmin device. But people were treating that data almost like circa 1980 Timex watch. They were really just start, stop, how far did I go, how fast did I go, and that was it. Yet there was a little mini computer that was sitting there that was capturing all kinds of information around grade and elevation and average speed and heart rate. And could we bring that information together and create visuals that maybe were interesting for somebody after they had gone for a ride? We were very focused on the cyclists at the time because they had access to this data. And Davey built a website. Again, you have to go back. This is 2007, 2008 now, 2009. He built a very basic website. We called it the Green Machine because it was this horrific color of green that we were contemplating as sort of the Strava colors.
Oh, so it wasn't originally orange.
Yeah, we ultimately came up with orange. Thank goodness for orange. That was another person who helped us on that. But at the time, we had this crazy green. And with that, he threw everything but the kitchen sink into it. We probably had features in that first website that still haven't made it to commercial, Strava life today. But in doing that, he created just enough of a basic little platform, that true MVP, right? That minimally viable experience. And then we just started conning, honestly, a few of our friends to try uploading their Garmin data to Strava. Again, this is back in a time when you had to take a Garmin off of your bike, plug it into the back of your computer, upload it, and do it. So I often joke with entrepreneurs in the early days, do things that don't scale, right? If you're going to walk away with it, it's like people want to focus on scale and network effects early on. We were focused on one thing. If we had one person uploading to Strava, could we get them to come back and do it again? Are we creating enough utility and enough value there? And kudos to Davey. He kind of just kept tinkering with this website, and that led to a pivotal summer of 2008, where we actually brought about 20 of our closest friends, about half were on the East Coast, half were on the West Coast. We brought them onto Strava in a competition. We basically put East Coast up against West Coast. Hey, would you guys do this for 30 days? It was right during the Tour de France in 2008. And we would send out little emails every day saying, hey, whoever posts the fastest, 5K on their bike, we'll get them a pair of socks, or, we'll give them some racing wheels, or whatever we could afford. And we said, and in return, we'd love to get feedback. We'd love to sort of see if you guys are enjoying this process. And, we were fortunate, Barry. By the end of that 30 days, we really saw a couple things. We saw a high energy. People were not just willing to upload, they wanted to upload. They wanted to sort of see what they were experiencing. And we were also really surprised by the amount of interaction between the cyclists online. I think we hadn't anticipated that there was sort of this social component to Strava, where by allowing the kind of, at the time, it was sort of this trash talking and this interaction that was going on, even by email, not even on the platform, we realized, there's something to this. There's something about sharing your activities with other people that keeps you motivated. So that experience in the summer of 2008 was the catalyst for Michael and I saying, we're not quite sure what the business looks like, but there's something here. We're solving a problem. We're hitting on a need. Let's get some professional developers behind us. We had some good friends that we had known from our prior company that were willing to join us, and away we went. By early 2009, we had a small team, and we were beginning to build something that we could charge for.
I want to quickly just go back to something you said initially. I know that it was very nuanced, but I think it was so profound. Is the idea of not thinking about scale at such an early stage. I think a lot of VCs or investors, they always say, how are you going to scale? How are you going to scale? Yes, I think scale does matter at some point, but not when you're starting out in the trenches, not when you're just testing out the idea and getting that MVP running. And I think the whole notion of satisfying the consumer at the end of the day, and I think obviously this has been something that Amazon has done and a lot of other companies have done, is how do you just get them satisfied and retain them so that they can continue to use the product. And in this case, it was, I like the Strava. I was seeing where I went and what I did, and I want to do it again. And I get to share that. And I think it just gets into this nice flywheel effect. So I just wanted to sort of segue into that, because I think that's a really important point for people, just to say, look, don't worry about scale. Just get people to love your product.
It's so true. You know how many people, they always ask me, so today Strava adds anywhere from 1 million to 2 million members every month. We're incredibly fortunate. We have this very nice flywheel effect, and our members just keep inviting their friends to join. That's not how we started. Like, I still remember, customer number one, the first customer that truly was our customer, was paying subscription to everybody else. His name is David. He lives in the Bay Area. He's still on Strava 13 years later. I know who he is. We still kudo each other. And I remember number one, and I remember number two, and I remember number three. I remember the single digits because that was the thesis was, if you don't have utility, if you don't, all these horrible buzzwords, product market fit and stuff, but fundamentally, if you're not engaging with your customer and they're not coming back, in the case of a product like ours, where we're hopeful that they're seeing enough value that they're going to use it on a frequent basis, why spend any time thinking about growth and scale? And I think there is real pressure oftentimes from investors and others to kind of think about that next chapter. And I'm not dismissing it. To your point, there's a point where scale becomes important, but I could tell you all kinds of funny stories Michael and I, we went down to Costco at one point and we bought hundreds of Garmin devices for the sheer purpose of handing them out to friends, just so that we could get more people onto the platform. And it was kind of like begging, hey, just try this. Will you try it? If we give you a Garmin device to use, would you try it out? But it worked, because not only did they use it, they started giving us the feedback we needed to kind of refine the experience. And they started giving us some critical pieces of information that really helped us think about how to make it a business and what they were willing to pay for. And
what was that reaction like when you went to Costco and you bought all those Garmin devices? Did they give you a stare?
so many horror stories. We could tell you so many horror stories. First off, Garmin themselves. They're a wonderful partner of ours today. But in the early days of Strava, I don't think they knew what to do with us. And we tried to get a retail relationship with them. And, we think we can help resell product. They didn't want to disrupt, their traditional retailer. So we had to go and find these things. And so kudos to Michael, because he was the one really tracking stuff down. We would get on the phone with Costco managers, frankly, across the country. And if we could find that there'd been a shipment, hey, we'll take 50 of those Garmin 300s that, people put on their handlebars and they'd ship them to us. But I also have horror stories of eBay sellers that we tried to buy from and like, oh yeah, we got 100 of them for you. And then we try to buy them and we'd send a check and we never saw those Garmins. So, this is part of the story, right? This is again, you win and you lose, but, that's what
it speaks to the
some customers to. We needed people. I think sometimes entrepreneurs worry too much about trying to get the product just right, so they want to put it in the hands of somebody.
Right.
It's software, and in software case, like we wanted to get it in front of people as quickly as possible, so that we could then iterate. We could kind of use that feedback loop as a way to, just keep refining, keep fine tuning, and find that sweet spot.
Well, I think one, it speaks to the nature of building a company, and it goes back and again, look, it's tough, it's hard, but it's rewarding. But so you have to actually have boots on the ground. You got to actually make calls. You got to speak to people. You got to be resourceful at the end of the day, and you got to figure out ways to, if you could say a no, well, maybe it's not a no for now, but it'll be a yes, or I could find a way to circumvent that in any way. And so figuring out those little intricacies and meandering your way, I think that becomes really important for people to figure out, well, how do I make this work? And because I feel like there's something there. And that speaks to the whole journey that you had with Costco and all of the people that you're trying to get the garments for and all that stuff. So, and yeah, look, I think it's really important to sort of point that out. So with the, once you got those good critical mass of like, okay, well, I have all of our buddies now using it and we've given them garments. What happened next? How did you get to the point where what's the next stages of fundraising? Do we just continue to get more people within our community and grow it organically? What was that growth like?
Yeah, great question. So I'll give you a couple key milestones that sort of happened along the way that, I'd love to say, hey, in hindsight, we knew exactly what we were doing. But, again, this is classic entrepreneur. So one critical milestone, we learned something really valuable. So part of what we did when we launched Strava was we went after one very specific target audience, and that was the cyclist. In fact, it was the road cyclist. And people think it was because Michael and I were, big roadies and spent all our time on the bike. Not really. Michael's a good cyclist. I enjoy my mountain biking, but both of us are primarily runners and rowers versus cycling. But we liked that as a go-to-market strategy because the cyclists weren't really being served much on the internet, whereas you could find products for runners. They were addicted to their data. Everything from power meters to heart rate to wattage to, thinking about their climbs and everything. So we like that. And what we learned very quickly was when a cyclist goes out for a ride, it doesn't matter whether they're doing a 100-mile ride or a 10-mile ride. There's usually some piece of that ride that's really, really important, some climb that they're going to do. In the Bay Area, it would be something like Hawk Hill or Old La Honda, or these sort of iconic climbs that people like to go out and challenge themselves on. And the cyclist kept telling us over and over, if you could show me how I'm doing on that climb, that would be really interesting. And so Davey, to his credit, was like, oh, I think we can do that. We can pull that out of the data. We can show them their segment, what became Strava segments. Well, as soon as we did that, our members then started to say to us, hey, this is awesome. I love being able to see my performance. Can I see how my buddy did yesterday? And could I compare sort of my segment performance versus them? And so that was really the beginnings of leaderboards on Strava and the ability to do segment comparisons. But the reason that's important for the business was we now had a really valuable reason why our customers wanted to invite their friends to join Strava. And so without any marketing now, we started to begin to see this network effect. We started to see all of our friends saying, hey, you got to join Strava and you got to come on so we can compare how we're doing. And it was a really fascinating, that happened in our first year, getting that feature live. And so by end of 2010, we were probably sitting there with approximately 4,000 to 5,000 cyclists, all organic. We had a subscription service that was usage based. So basically you could use Strava for free for 5 times a month, but on the 6th time you had to pay us. And because our cyclists were so addicted to Strava, we had this huge conversion rate on subscription. And so at that point we were sort of saying, wow, we're growing organically really well and we're getting this good conversion rate. If we put some real dollars behind this and actually started thinking about marketing and growing it in a more professional way, basically raising some capital, would that be wise? And we went out and tested the investment market a bit. We looked at maybe an angel round, and ultimately we actually did a venture round. A good friend of ours who worked at one of the firms got his partners excited. And so we raised from a firm called Sigma at the time. They're now called Jackson Square Ventures. And we did our Series A, and it was on opportunity. It was this opportunity to see if we could, capture a market that was presented to us. So those were the milestones. It was kind of that organic growth along with the strong subscription rates, and really predicated on just, some simple features that really started to drive this high engagement rate that we were talking about earlier. Get the engagement before you worry about growth.
That's really important, because I am, now I think there's again this notion of like, well, if you're venture backed, you're doing some good stuff, but that's not necessarily the case, because in this day and age, everyone wants to get VC backing for their own reasons, but it's not necessarily, traditionally that's not what venture capital is for. It's when you get to a point where you need to actually have injection to scale and you actually grow your team. But I'm sure Strava would have just done fine, obviously much slower, if it would have bootstrapped itself. I think the VC just accelerated that even more to get Strava in front of on more phones, in front of more eyeballs as quickly as possible. And so there's something to be said about the notion of why venture capital exists, and not every company has to receive venture capital. So, it's from your perspective, working with Michael and sort of the team, you really thought about long and hard whether this was supposed to be venture backed or not, and there were certain key decisions in that process to figure out, well, you have the traction, you have the growth, but what's the roadmap going to look like? And I think it really resonates with me, but also a lot of other people that I've spoken to, is that you just don't need to have VC if you don't have to have it. And there are certain points when that actually does become the need.
No, Barry, you're spot on. I think and again, I know for somebody who's basically grown up my adult life here in the Bay Area, you can quickly sort of think that the only way companies can grow or thrive is if they have venture funding, when in fact, if you just move 50 miles away from Silicon Valley, you realize that 99.9% of companies in the world don't have access to venture capital, never did get it, and somehow they did very well. So you'll laugh. There's actually a case study now that's taught both at Harvard and Stanford business schools and maybe some of the others, where the case study is about Strava and about our decision as to whether or not we should raise the venture money or just maybe some angel money, but or just keep bootstrapping. And every time I just guessed at the class and listened to the students, all of the students are like, they shouldn't take the money. The business is good. They shouldn't do it. And of course, the story, we end up taking the money, but they're kind of right. There was not a right or wrong there. I don't think Michael and I have ever looked back with regret. We've had really great investment partners. We've got the likes of Jackson Square Ventures, who I mentioned, or Sequoia Capital, or TCV. We've got some great firms behind us. But it did set us on a path that required then a different mindset. Now you do have I don't want to say requirements for some kind of growth, but the capital's there. It's there to be invested. So let's go see if we can build something interesting. And that's, in Strava's case, no regret. It was worth it. But
let's quickly talk about your co-founder very briefly, Michael. And the reason I bring him up is because there's a lot of people out there who are single co-founders. they maybe want to find someone else, or maybe they just have the skills to do everything themselves. But how important is it to have a co-founder? Is it important? Is it not important? And how did Michael help you, and you help Michael mutually to get through this? Not just from a building the business perspective, but from being a friend there, making sure that there's support and making sure that you're pushing each other to be the best that you can be. How important is that to you?
Yeah, boy, Barry, you're getting to just the heart of, I think, entrepreneurship and what what we're about, and I will fully attest. Michael and I are probably a little bit of an anomaly. We're 30 plus years in as business partners. We've got 2 companies that we've founded together behind us. We've been really fortunate with both of them, to just have them do as well as they have. So I have a bias. I'll start by the outset. It's like, I can't imagine starting a company without some kind of co-founder, preferably Michael. And if it's not Michael, it's going to be, I've got twin boys that are now juniors in college, and I keep joking with them. It's like, come on, you got to graduate just so let's go found something together. So I'm a big believer. What I would say is there's something here that's really important. I don't know that it's as important to have a co-founder as it is to appreciate the importance of a team. It is an entrepreneurship, and starting something can be very lonely. It's just, and I remember the first time I did this, 1995, I quit my job working for the venture firm. I went to work at a local running store, making $8 an hour just to put food on the table. I was recently married. I've been married for all of 6 months. And I remember that what I would do was I would move from this little cottage that I was in, where we lived, to this tiny little storage shed that my landlord had. He allowed me to basically rent like half the storage shed so I could set up a little office. And my wife at the time, Lisa, she would laugh because she could see me sitting out there. Sometimes she was sure I was just twiddling my thumbs, because you're desperate to try to get something started. But on any given day, there's only so much you can do. There's only so many calls you can make. There's only so many people. And so I spent a lot of time recruiting teammates, recruiting co-founders. Thankfully, Michael was there. He was there in the mid-90s. He was at Stanford, and he was willing to listen to all my crazy ideas. And I would joke that he was the one guy who had a fast internet back in 1995. So he was a good partner that way. But really what it was just that person that I think what you're describing, somebody that you can be candid with, you can be transparent. You can lean. I mean, Michael and I, if you look at our course in Strava, he and I have both been CEO twice. I started as CEO. It made sense because I'd run the other company. It was going to be California based, so I ran it. But then I had some family situation come up, and I needed him to take over. And thank goodness he did. And he did that for, 4 years. And then he had a family situation arise in late 2013. And so I was in a position to step in and run the company for the next 3 to 4 years. Just having trust in someone like that, having someone who compliments you. I think this is why I always think about the team. I mean, we're different. I mean, Michael, again, he's a PhD in economics. He is brilliant. He is the smarter of the 2 of us. I mean that wholeheartedly. He understands the numbers of a business in a way that goes right past me. But then there's things I bring to the table we've found over time we complement each other. So I'm a huge fan of people going out and finding teammates for their companies, whether they're going to be a co-founder and so forth. And I think the trick is, go look for those skills that you don't have.
You said about
as an entrepreneur, that is your job, by the way. Your job is not to be the best salesperson or the best marketing person or the best engineer or the best product person. That is not your job. Your job is to have the idea and inspire the best marketing person, salesperson, developer to join you. And so, same thing with a co-founder. It's like, no reason finding another version of you. Go find somebody that complements, what you're not good at. That's when good things happen.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about the energy and the spirit of that person. It's not just having the skill set to do so, but do they believe in an idea? Do they resonate with the mission that you're creating? And as you mentioned, right, yes, you have to build the company, but you have to sort of paint a clear vision and provide clarity of where you want to go. And that's going to inspire the next, you're the onboarding of the new employees, and they can hopefully onboard their friends and their networks onto the company as well, and get this nice chain reaction going.
That's right. You're 100% right. I will take hunger and passion all day long over 10 years of experience. The people can learn the skills. We can go find people to teach us stuff, but if you don't believe in the mission, it's really hard to stay motivated.
Let's quickly just dive into building companies hard. I think we've acknowledged that, and I think that the journey you've been on is also very interesting. But it wouldn't be interesting without understanding a little bit about some of those hardest moments that you've gone through. You've mentioned a few of them, not so much hard, but a lot of hustling that you had to do. But once Strava got to a point where a good number of people were using it, the team was growing, you're getting presence in the US at least, and starting to think about international. But were there any hiccups or any roadblocks in the way that you can vividly remember that said, look, to the point where I can't sleep properly at night, or this is bothering me, or I'm feeling anxious about this, because it speaks true to sort of the journey of the founder. And I'd like to learn a bit more about whether it be you or Michael, or both of you. What are some of those tough moments that you went through?
Yeah. I'll give you two quick ones that are a little different, but kind of the same thing. So my short answer, by the way, is yes, they happen all the time, right? And in part, what Michael and I have even talked actively about this. In fact, at one point we had a whiteboard and we were talking about how we needed to manage the way in which we would react to the ups and downs of startup life. And it's, when I say startup, we're 13 years in, and it's still sort of the ups and downs of just growing a business. And we've come to realize that the things are going to happen. It's how we decide to respond to them. It's our own emotional ups and downs that we can control. So that's when I say we went to a whiteboard. At one point, we just drew a sine wave and said, hey, instead of reacting like this, let's try to react more like this. And so you'll find two guys who are maybe a little grizzled and veteran-like and don't get too high or too low with anything nowadays. But here's two examples. Early days, probably within the first 3 years of our existence, we had a really difficult situation where there was a wrongful death lawsuit that was filed against Strava. We were accused of basically being an event organizer. Unfortunately, a Strava member had died. They had been descending a hill on their bicycle. They'd crossed over a double yellow line going too fast, and they ran into a car and they died. And shortly before the statute of limitations ran out, the parents of this 41-year-old sued Strava and said that we were the cause of his death. That's difficult. It's almost existential in the sense of, boy, the last thing we were trying to do was to create either a dangerous situation for others or in any way sort of impede someone's livelihood. The whole idea of Strava is to keep people healthy. So we ended up defending ourselves vigorously on that. And ultimately the case was thrown out and so forth. But I tell you that story just because who would have predicted that when we started Strava to be this really positive, powerful force, that, there'd be some people out there who would look at it very differently. And we've seen that a couple of times. We've seen that through that. We had another situation where we were accused of exposing, military bases. That turned out to be false. That was a classic example of a fake news story, but it created a lot of tension because we had to really look at sort of, are we actually doing something that is putting people at harm? And we clearly work closely with the government and military to ensure that we don't, but even fake news, the perception becomes reality. So those have been there along the way. I would caution any entrepreneur that, don't be surprised that, to have the unexpected happen. I would say the more recent one, Barry, that I think is more attuned to maybe what naturally happens with a lot of companies. We found ourselves in 2019 in a situation where we'd hired a new CEO. We'd brought a CEO in about 2.5 years earlier as a succession plan. He was just in a situation. I was in a situation where I really could not keep running the business. I just had family obligations. And so I wanted to step back into the chairman role. We hired this person. And no regret. And I have a lot of respect for the gentleman who we hired. But the company just found itself in a difficult place. It wasn't working. And it, again, was almost existential. I mean, it was really in a place where financially we were in a very bad hole. Strategically, it was unclear where we were going. And so we replaced him. Michael and I stepped back in. Michael stepped in as CEO. I stepped in as executive chairman. And we had to do the unfortunate thing of letting go of about 15% of the team at the time. We needed to stabilize the company. That was hard, like that. And I can appreciate it's happened a lot here in the Valley in recent years. And, particularly this last year and a half, I fully own, like, nobody wants to let go of their existing team. But did we learn some lessons? 100%. Would I ever say I was glad we had to go through it? No. But the resolve that you get, learning how to go through that, understand sort of what that means, not only for the folks we had to let go and how to do that properly. I think there is the importance of sort of the means to the end is very important. And sort of learning that, but also the team that remains and, how to inspire them and circle the wagons and what happened there. So just two examples. I mean, I could go in ad nauseum about both of those, but if anything, if anybody takes away, it's just like it happens, in these companies, and you got to roll with it.
And that's the last thing you said about the layoffs. That speaks true to exactly what's happening now. And yeah, I mean, it's tough for anyone who's sort of in those situations for both sides, the employee, but also the person who has to make the decision. And at the end of the day, it's not a personal, I want to say. It's obviously it's for the benefit of hopefully the business thriving, for the betterment of people being able to continue to use the product and live their best lives. And I think at the same time, it's always hard to go through those types of decision-making processes. And you mentioned that sine wave again. It's very resonates with me a lot about the idea, like this notion of being of having equanimity. Just stay in your sweet spot. If it gets too high, don't get too excited. But even if it gets really low, then stay above water and be able to figure things out with your co-founder. Were there any moments where you felt like, I don't think, this is it for Strava, I don't think we can continue anymore? Or was it like, no, we'll fight through this, and there was that sort of that growth mindset? What was going through your head during those types of moments?
Yeah, it's funny, and maybe this is a little bit of hindsight where it's much easier to stomach. I'll go back to that sort of endurance mentality. I don't ever remember thinking like, oh, this is it. I do think that, I have this funny line, I often like to tell entrepreneurs, one of the beauties of software is you just can't kill it. Like it's really hard to kill software companies. We make a mistake, we can roll the feature back. There's a way, if you have something that people are willing to pay for, like you should be able to do it. So I don't think that we've ever been in a situation where, oh my, is this the last day that the office is going to be open and we're going to have to shut it down? It's never felt like that. I think it's a little more nuanced in that, are we living up to our own expectations? Are we delivering on the opportunity? And that's, I think of three important constituents here. I think about our members, the people who are using Strava every day, our community, and are we living up to what they're expecting from us? Our employees and the team, are we creating an environment there? And our shareholders, our investors and the people who've put our faith in us through their dollars. And that's the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night. Those three, it's not that they have, wild expectations, but just sometimes it's hard to meet everybody's expectations as you're trying to build.
That totally makes sense. And probably a good segue to sort of go into a bit about the mental health side of things. And, definitely it's getting more popular now, the idea of being able to be more transparent about, mental health, especially in a very high-paced, high-stressed environment. How do you deal with sort of problems, not just in on the Strava side or on the business side, but personally, like if there's, you mentioned there were a few family issues in the past and having to juggle that with work, building a company and sort of taking care of your family. What's your escape? Obviously, I'm sure one of your answers will be exercise, which is always a good thing. How much has going out on a run, going for a hike helped your state of mind?
I can't even measure it. Like that to me, 30 minutes of fresh air, throwing on the running shoes and going, slower and slower as the years go by. But nonetheless, it really isn't about the physical fitness. It's about clearing my head. It's about getting some clarity around a challenge that I have. So I'm not just saying this because I'm trying to promote Strava. I really don't think there's a better elixir, a better solution in the world to sort of just clicking in and you can do it with a walk, you can do it with a run, you can do it with a ride, you can do it with a hike. But there's something for me about being outdoors, disconnecting and doing that. So that is solution number one, without question. I think, Barry, the other thing, and at times Strava's, this has been a blessing and a curse, but you have to understand at Strava, we've had something called the ABCs almost since inception from day one. We formalized them about 3 or 4 years into the business, but the ABCs are our core values. There's an A, a B, and 3 Cs. Actually, there's 2 A's. I should be clear. There was originally an A, a B, and 3 Cs: authenticity, balance, and then craftsmanship, camaraderie, and commitment. In 2020, we added an important other A to our ABCs, and that's anti-racism, because we felt like that was something that we were not paying attention to, and we realized we were part of the problem rather than the solution. So 2 A's, a B, and a 3 C's. For the sake of this conversation, the one that I'll talk about is balance, because balance is a tricky one. Balance and commitment. I remember having a conversation with one of our CFOs at Strava one day, and he's like, "We can't have balance and commitment. They're at odds with each other." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Of course we can. It's just that balance doesn't happen every day. And frankly, to be committed, they're one and the same, because you should be committed to ensuring that you're in this in a sustainable way." And so for me, thinking about balance, the best example I can give you, there was a time in my career when I had the best job in the world. I was running Strava. I was the CEO of Strava from, again, 2014, 2016, 2017. But I had a hard thing going on, which was that I was the primary parent. I was a single parent with twin boys. And I needed to be present for them. And I just couldn't figure out how to be in both places at the same time. And that was when we opted to bring in a new CEO and go down that path. And that's part of, I think, what you're talking about. I just had to make some hard choices around where, what was most important, and no regret. I've got 2 amazing kids that now at this point they're long gone, and I probably have more time to spend on Strava these days. But I think that's, for building great companies, that's the other thing, is that they shouldn't be dependent on any one individual. There's a great book out there, Built to Last by Jim Collins. It was written, again, years and years ago. It talks about, time tellers versus clock builders as entrepreneurs. And clock builders were sort of the Hewlett Packards of the world, where that company existed, 30 years after they passed away. That's what inspires Michael and I. Strava should last long beyond, even Michael and I being on this planet if we're successful. So a big part of this is just to kind of have that mindset that, we got to play in this for the long game.
Speaking true to sort of the Strava, I guess the sort of the slogan of Strava as well is, look, you should go out there, because it's helped me as well go through some tough times as well, and being able to, whenever I sort of go out there, log the run, log the ride, it does clear my head a lot. And I think that
we've always said there's always time for a ride or a run, and we really mean that. But I think and look, can people take advantage of that? Have we maybe had teammates where they seem to spend more of their time working out than they do, maybe deliver, maybe, I can't think of anybody offhand, but it can be taken advantage of in any company. But that's not the ethos. The ethos is, what's our goal? What do we need to get accomplished? Sometimes we got to burn the midnight oil because there's something we got to get done now. But And, again, anybody who's been through athletics, there's these cycles you have to go through. If you're going to go race a marathon, you're not going to go and just race it tomorrow, nor are you going to go try to do 2 in a row. You're going to have a plan, and you're going to build up to the moment, and then you're going to have to recover. And I think those are the kind of cycles that companies have to go through as well. And so that's part of what we try to build into Strava, sometimes better than others.
Yeah, and I think that definitely resonates with a lot of people. And thinking about sort of the future of Strava, how do you envision that? I know that you're now, obviously, you and Michael have sort of tag team quite a bit throughout the journey of Strava, but it'd be interesting to see about, you recently introduced video. And when I say recent, probably like last year, which was fun because now you're starting to see a lot of, now you can record Zwift sessions. You can just show people, where you are in the world. When you start to thinking about new features like that, how do you decide on, I'm sure you have a laundry list of things that could be introduced into Strava. I'm sure a lot of your employees, even the community, is saying, add this, add that. But how do you filter through all of that?
Probably not as well as we'd like. I mean, the honest answer is it's still a work in progress inside Strava. I often refer to it as the noise of opportunity. There are just a million great ideas and that come in from our own team, from our community, from our investors, you name it. Everybody's got an idea for what the next feature should be or the next iteration. And frankly, we have so many features today that just trying to actually maintain and evolve them. Video is the perfect example. You're right. We launched about 1.5 years ago. We've been really pleased with the uptick and, people's ability to kind of tell their story, their athletic story via video. But we're the first to acknowledge it still feels like video circa, 2015 on Instagram. So we need to keep nurturing that and making it better. Simultaneously, there's 1,700 other features that we're either trying to get out or improve. It's a work in progress. We have an amazing product team and engineering team. There's a gentleman right now, actually, just quietly, he's kind of on an interim basis here because we're going through some executive changes. Michael's announced that he will be stepping down, so we're looking for a new CEO. So, that CEO will have to build out the team that they want. But we do have a gentleman right now. His name is Misha, who was the founder and CEO at FatMap, actually one of the companies that we acquired recently. And he's leading a lot of our overall sort of Strava product initiatives as we go into 2023. And it's just been really fun to have Misha's eyes and ears and on the process, because I think that he knows Strava really well, but he knows it from the outside, and he knows FatMap, and it's been great to watch that. So lots of new stuff that's coming, lots of improvements to the existing experience. We get really excited this time of year because this is right when everybody starts to get back outside and doing their things, particularly here in the Northern Hemisphere. But I will tell any entrepreneur out there, it's an art, not a science. Like it's tricky.
With the, I know you mentioned, the looking up for a new CEO. I think it's sort of being that news is spreading right now. Who are you looking for, and what was the reason for sort of that Michael to step back? And I think you've done this in the past as well. Is it more so to a fresher perspective on what Strava could be down the road? And if so, what is your vision for Strava for the next 10 years? Is it going to be, is it still going to be a platform for all of us to use, to track everything and to share stories, or is it becoming more of a brand now? And then taking Strava to become, okay, well, how does Strava become the next Nike or next Adidas, especially in the sporting world? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So I can just quickly answer sort of the why behind Michael's transition, because there's nothing there. Actually, he's been pretty public about it. He's put out some blog posts and so forth. It's nothing more than, if you go back to, I talked about a hard moment back in 2019 when he and I had to step back in. That wasn't something that he had anticipated, wasn't something that he wanted or was searching for. And so he's done a pretty Herculean job over the last 3 years of navigating Strava through this place where we were in a difficult position as a company. then to navigate us through COVID, to navigate us through, frankly, a lot of the social issues that have faced this country have been a big part of any company in the last couple of years. He's got us to an amazing place where we're now, we're growing exceptionally well. We're profitable. We're well financed. We've got an amazing investor group behind us. We've got this stellar team that is working well. And so I think from Michael's perspective, is there somebody now, given that the company is, we're 450 employees, we're generating hundreds of millions in revenue. Who's that person who is very familiar, or at least has seen the playbook for the next 3 or 4 years? Because that's not something that's in Michael and I or in our DNA. We're startup guys. We haven't taken companies to $1 billion in revenue and sort of seen that scale. Remember, we talked about scale earlier. We do things that don't scale. But, frankly, maybe now's the time to be investing in teams and infrastructure that allow us to do some of the scale work that needs to happen in order for Strava to thrive, which I think gets to your second question, which is really, where do we want it to go? One of the fun things about Strava is that we may be 13 years old, but we truly feel like we're just scratching the surface around what's possible. And I would think of Strava as it is very much a global platform from which we want to be able to support not just the community of athletes, but also all those companies and services and apps that also serve the same community that we are. And we have over 100,000 API partners today. We have Nike's got, I think Nike has 100 clubs on Strava today. We want these companies, Zwift that you described earlier, great example of a great partner. For those who aren't familiar, sort of this online sort of virtual communities you can go and cycle in. Tremendous partner that we want to continue to understand, how do we build the kinds of tools and services that enable our community to connect in with those products in a seamless way. And, in doing so, allow them to thrive. And I'm not just talking about the partners, but ultimately it's our shared customer. It's that athlete that thrives. So for Strava, we'll keep expanding. We would love to keep adding members to the community, keep thinking about the activities they like to do and how they want to share those activities, keep them inspired. And then can we also continue to be a platform for the overall health of the community being both the partners and the athletes, in a way that people are successful. That to me is a fun challenge over the next 4 or 5 years for Strava.
In the sense that there's definitely a lot of directions where Strava can go, and what I see is the notion of like, well, how do you make that right decision of, well, becoming a well-known brand, having that community part of it as well. And I think Strava is really there to really bring people together, really bring as many like-minded folks and maybe unlike-minded folks to a platform where, it's not just about running or cycling anymore. It's more about community and making sure, how do you build something that's going to last, as what you just mentioned before, about sort of giving the reins or sort of passing the baton on to someone else who can see sort of the vision for next, and then hopefully you'll be there to sort of guide them along the way as well. And I think that's really important.
Michael and I don't intend to go anywhere. We've got nothing else to do. I don't think we've got another startup in us. So we want to stay engaged, but I think we can do it in a way that's helpful to a new CEO and play that role. So that's what's exciting to us.
Let's finish quickly off with just a couple of things that I usually ask is from people like yourself, entrepreneurs, founders, is a bit about the tips and advice you can offer young budding founders, people who are sort of coming through the ranks, maybe just going through college or maybe just starting to think about doing their own thing. Is there anything you can speak to about certain advice you can give to them? And this could be around discipline, or it could be around, consistency, any words of advice where you can sort of give them a bit of a kick in the right direction based on what you've been through with Michael and building Strava.
Yeah. I tell you what, Barry, I'll give you two. Here, I'll give you three. There's fun little phrases. So first one I'll give, these are in no particular order. So one phrase I use all the time, speed over greed. So entrepreneurs get caught up in this whole thing of like trying to protect their nest egg and like they get into fundraising and like, what's the right valuation? Like, look, if you find the right partner and as long as they're treating you fairly, speed over greed, go. And I think that this is true in general. Like again, speed, being decisive, even if you're wrong, is generally 10 times better than sitting around hoping for the perfect amount of information to make the perfect decision. So I'm just, speed over greed is kind of this notion around both from an investment perspective, but also just decision making. It's go, because by making the decisions, you'll iterate more quickly. So that's one thought. Second that I would give you is I would just tell entrepreneurs, don't be afraid of the niche. I've had 2 companies now where I was accused by investors of not building companies, barely building products, basically building features. And yet in both cases, the first one we took public in 1998, 99, had a market cap of 11 billion. Yet at I can tell you, Series A, I had a lot of people turn me down because like, this is not a company, this is a feature. And it was because we were trying to solve a very specific problem, customer email management, how to respond to customer email. In Strava's case, we got the same thing. You guys are a hobby, you're a niche, you're just trying to serve cyclists. And we kept trying to explain to people, look, that is a go-to-market strategy. We're going to go an inch wide, mile deep with this one group. But if we do that right, that will give us the leverage to expand more effectively. It'll give us the confidence and the credibility to expand. And so our vision is to support a global community of athletes across lots of activities and countries and types of individuals. But we have to start somewhere. So I would just remind entrepreneurs, it's okay if you're niche. It's much better because you can develop traction there. And then I'll give you the last one. I always joke about the 3 Ps. If you're only going to remember 3 words on this whole podcast, 3 Ps: patience, persistence, and perspective. You got to have patience in entrepreneur. You got to build patience in your model because this stuff goes all left and right and goes all over the place. We talked earlier, Barry, about just persistence and grind. You just got to keep grinding. Sometimes that's the guy who wins. And I think perspective is really important because that's where you can get through the hard days, just by maintaining perspective and realizing, in the case of Strava, we know we're doing something good out there. At the same time, we're not curing cancer. Like we're not. Sometimes maybe we should have been, but we're not. We're trying to keep people a little more active, maybe running, riding, hiking just a little more than they otherwise were. And it's important to maintain perspective because if that's what we're doing, that's a good thing. Everybody can sleep at night. If the thing breaks down for 24 hours, okay, we'll get it fixed as soon as we can, but we're going to maintain perspective. I think that's really important in entrepreneurship.
Wise words. And I appreciate you sort of going and sort of taking me through that. And I think a lot of that resonated with me, but also I know that I've been trying to sort of espouse that to people who are sort of building their thing, who are struggling. And I think it's the ones who do struggle the most that they have to get this type of, these words will help them a lot. And I hope that, this will definitely get them in the right direction as well. Finally, this is just a question that I was curious about, and I'm always asking this type of question to people who are building things for themselves. Your day is kind of erratic, and it doesn't have to be now, but back then in the days where you were sort of grinding it out, just tell me a little bit about your daily routine. You're waking up, you're sort of building the business, and then you have to go back to bed. But I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in between. Regulate when you are sort of building a company like Strava. We'll like to learn more about, the time you wake up, do you exercise in between, the breaks between, and then what time you go to bed?
Yeah, you're right. It's pretty erratic. I'm not sure I've ever had the same week twice in my almost 55 years here. So, when really knee deep running in Strava, I would say there were a couple of sort of mainstays. One, I became a big fan of the early hours. Early mornings were important for me on 2 fronts. One, there would be no shower and no changing until I had gotten a workout in. Even if it was just 20 minutes in the dark, that was critical. So for me, that morning workout, really, really important. And just also a chance. I do use my mornings after I've worked out. I'll use my mornings to just kind of level set across electronics, through email and so forth, because I know throughout the day it's not going to happen. So morning is there. My day was, thank goodness I had this amazing assistant at the time, this woman named Hera, who was, critical to my success and kept me on the right track. And no day was ever the same, but you just try to prioritize. The trick was always what is important versus urgent. And Michael and I ask ourselves that a lot. Is it important or is it urgent? And sometimes that urgent always gets in the way, but you really got to make sure you're focused on the important. And then, as I alluded to earlier, the important thing for me as the day kind of came to an end was my primary job, which was being a parent and having these two amazing guys, Jake and Charlie. And, at times they would accuse me of being distracted. I remember many a meal where they were probably telling me about their day at school, and I wasn't hearing it because I was busy sort of processing something that happened earlier in the day at Strava. But nonetheless, home for dinner and whether it was at one of their sports practices or something like that. But that was critical. And you're right. Then I'd stay up a little bit late and probably crank through some emails and things. But, by 11 o'clock midnight, I was down for the count and getting ready for the next day.
Thank you so much for having the conversation with me. I hope that it provides a lot of guidance and helps become a North Star for a lot of people who are building something for themselves and thinking of maybe doing something and just trying to do something a bit more fulfilling for their lives. And I think the advice and sort of the story you've told really will hopefully resonate with them. But also for me, I just want to thank you for building Strava. It's definitely helped me a lot over these past 7 years since I started using it. And I've met a lot of amazing people, both in the US and around the world, who have I met on Strava, and we followed each other. And it's given me an opportunity to continue to be as healthy as I can, but also be the best person that I can be for my friends, for my family, as you alluded to at the beginning about, the more you feel better about yourself, the more you can help be a better person around other people. So thank you and Michael for building Strava, and you've definitely impacted a lot of lives, including mine.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for being a member. I'm glad it's working, and we got to follow each other. We got to keep inspiring each other out there.
Appreciate it, and
right.
Speak next time.
That sounds great.
All
Take care.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode. If you like this episode, be sure to check out more by subscribing to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.